Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I always say that because we're in a sort of a time zone that is so diverse, even here in the United States, where I'm reaching out from, and around the world. But I am sure that you will enjoy what we have lined up for you um, today, this afternoon, this morning. I am Dr. Canyouth White, and you're listening to Canyouth Exploration, your topic in a podcast. I've been talking to Amanda Blackwood. She'll be telling you about human trafficking. You know that a number of persons have been affected by human trafficking in some ways, be it that they are victims or family members of victims of human trafficking. The statistics she'll be talking about, and perhaps she'll be able to tell us about ways to identify whether or not an individual is in danger of human trafficking. A lot of times we are not able to identify these persons, even in the airport, in our own communities. Hey, it's important that you give an eye out, and she'll be able to talk to us more about that. But Amanda will be looking at these danger signs and human trafficking and giving you her experience, which should be a very interesting experience for you to learn more about human trafficking. Let me let Amanda into the studio. Amanda, how are you
Hi,
doing?
Dr. White. How are you?
I'm good. All right, we'll be talking a lot more about human trafficking. But before we do that, who is Amanda Blackwood?
I am primarily a believer in God, but I'm also a wife, a mother, a brand new grandmother, an author, an artist, a public speaker. There's a lot of stuff that I do.
Yeah,
It's a whole lot of who I am.
I know, right? I know, but you know what is important though? You mentioned a believer in God first of all, and before everything else, that should come first, and I applaud you for
Thank you. Thank you. My
that.
husband taught me that. That's why he's second.
All right, I tell you, I love that. I love that. But Amanda, I always ask my guests this: your childhood, what was little Amanda like growing up? Wherever you're gonna tell us where, what that was like in terms of the family, the siblings, the community, and so on.
The community was diverse. And by that, I mean it was multiple locations I grew up in, but it was also people from all over the world. My father was in the Air Force.
Okay.
So I was born in Germany. We moved so many times when I was a kid that I lost count for a while.
Yeah.
But in total, now that I've looked back, I have moved 43 times in my life. That's a lot. I did have one older sibling when I was a kid growing up. I haven't talked to him or seen him in many years at this point, and I don't have any connection with my family now.
Oh, okay. Interestingly, though, back in Jamaica, there's this program that on one of the radio stations where families who have lost contact somehow are able to connect with each other by just announcing, "Hey, who is this guy? Who is this person?" If you want to, that's okay. If you want to say, "Hey, James Blackwood," that's one of my brother I'd like to get in touch with. That would be fine with you. If not, that's okay.
Well, for me, it was actually a choice. So I
Okay.
grew up in an extremely abusive household.
Okay.
The first time I remember ever being molested, I was only 4 years old, and that was my older brother. My mother was emotionally very abusive, and my father was physically abusive. And
Okay.
with that being the entirety of the family that I grew up with and all I ever knew, it took me a long time to be able to walk away from that and break that connection and stop that cycle of abuse. I was in my 20s the last time I saw them. It was 2009. And then the last time I spoke to any of them, it was through an email
Yeah.
to and from my mother in 2013. So it's been 10 years since I've had any contact with any of them.
Yeah. That's all right. That's all right. You're a super person still. Doesn't matter what happened. All of us, myself, I had a very challenging childhood, but we have overcome that. It's just part of life. And
Right.
look at you now.
Absolutely. But going through those diverse childhoods, a traumatic childhood specifically, can
Yeah.
really affect the rest of your life. It can change who you are
Yeah.
in terms of the way that you process different things, the way that you think, the way that you feel, the way that you react to normal everyday situations.
Yeah.
And you build up these habits, these trauma reactions, and then every time you react the same way to something that's not actually traumatizing, but
Yeah.
it's reminding you of the trauma, you're reinforcing these really bad habits.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in doing that, I set myself up, and the early childhood abuse set me up for constantly being abused and manipulated throughout my life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's interesting, though. As Sigmund Freud, would say, the child is the father of the man. In other words, your childhood experience will affect who you are as an adult, and you're right about that. So your whole worldview will be different based on what you had gone through, right? But guess what
Right.
happened, Amanda? Our adversities are not for us, it's for someone else. And that is why you're going to share, and you have shared some of your experience to encourage someone to say, hey, look at Amanda now. Look at Dr. White now, who had suggested that he had gone through some stuff. So that's what Canyouth Exploration, your topic in a podcast, wants to do. And Amanda, as you talked about your childhood briefly and the challenges, you have gone through traumatic experiences. But we're going to look a bit at this human trafficking thing and some of the myths before we go into your real experience. What are some of the myths, the popular myths of human trafficking?
Well, one of them is our basic understanding of what human trafficking actually is. So, if we were to look it up and define human trafficking, the Department of Homeland Security defines human trafficking as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or sex acts from another person. So, if you notice, there's no mention of moving or transporting a person somewhere.
Right.
So, any kind of transportation of a human being would be human smuggling, not human trafficking.
Oh,
Which can be confusing since trafficking, we automatically think of moving cars on the road. That's not what human trafficking is. But if you notice, there's also no mention of money.
right.
So human trafficking does not equal prostitution, and prostitution does not equal human trafficking.
Right.
So we have this conception built in our brains, aside from all of that human trafficking only happens to children. The hashtag save our children or save the children is very popular among circles of people who claim to be informed on human trafficking.
Right.
About 1/4 of all human trafficking victims worldwide are under the age of 18. When we're talking literally millions of people, that's a lot of underage kids, but it's still only 1/4 of all victims. And most people that are trafficked are not trafficked by total strangers kidnapping them in creepy windowless vans from grocery store parking lots, like we see on social media, people talking about this stuff and saying, oh, it's human trafficking. It's more likely that person might be a serial predator and molester and rapist than it is that they're a trafficker. Most people that are trafficked by people they know and they trust and they love, and people with a sense of authority of their lives. Grandparents, parents, aunts and uncles, boyfriends and girlfriends, somebody familiar already to that person.
Oh, hey, those are important, myths that you have cleared up. So it simply means that, well, you have experienced it already. It simply means that I could be a victim of human trafficking, even in my adult age at this time if I'm not careful.
Absolutely. The youngest person in Colorado that was rescued from trafficking in recent years was less than a year old, but the oldest was a woman in her 70s.
Interesting. I like how you cleared up these myths, because I should be, I should concede that a lot of what you have cleared up I didn't even know, right? And I have learned something from you, and I know that my audience, those who are listening on their favorite podcast platform, those watching Canyouth Exploration, your topic in the podcast would be clear that it know. But while we talk about the myths, right, we should consider the forms of human trafficking. Perhaps you have alluded to that while discussing the myths. What are some of the forms of human trafficking that we should be aware of?
Here in the United States, we talk mostly about sex trafficking. That's because this can be easily sensationalized by the news, unfortunately. It only makes up about 14% of all human trafficking cases worldwide. The majority of human trafficking is labor trafficking. So when somebody is smuggled into the country or out of the country into another area, they can often find themselves in a place of debt bondage, which is a form of labor trafficking. They will be put to work in the back of house for restaurants. They will work in nail salons or hair salons, and every penny that they make goes to their debt bondage, and they can't ever seem to get out from under this heavy weight that they're under. They don't have any freedoms of their own. They have to stay where it is that they're told to stay, which is often slum-like conditions. There's also a huge, huge problem with child slavery and in the form of being child soldiers in many nations in Africa. This is a massive problem. It still falls under labor trafficking because they are exploiting these children to be able to get something in return that is not a sex act, but rather an act of labor. These are some major issues, but this is why the sex trafficking percentage is so small around the world, is because the growing source and the growing need for labor trafficking in sweatshops and child soldiers in debt bondage. This stuff, these numbers are just massive. There's also a very small, very minor community of organ trafficking.
Okay.
People can be taken and their organs harvested, oftentimes leaving them dead, to be able to sell these organs on the black market to medically save somebody else's life.
Wow. You know, that's I can remember long ago. I know this lady. She was employed to someone in a Caribbean, one of the Caribbean islands, and she explained, right, that she was in a dark room during the night, right? No TV, no radio. She worked and she had to go back into that room. However, they allow her to leave eventually after she decided, hey, I'm not staying here. So that, in my mind, I'm now learning that it's human trafficking. It was.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I have people tell me all the time, I have never talked to a survivor of human trafficking before, and I always tell them that you know of.
Yeah.
There's literally hundreds of millions of us out here. You never know if somebody that you're talking to is actively going through trafficking scenarios right now, or if they were lucky enough and part of the less than 2% who actually survive.
Oh, wow. You know, I need to ask you this, since we're talking about the forms of human trafficking. There are some of these employment sites, you know, I won't name any on this program, right? And we therefore have to be careful. Those persons who are unemployed have to be careful how they engage some of these so-called employers seeking persons to be employed on these sites.
Yeah, absolutely. Traffickers, through forms of forced labor, can use all kinds of deceptive methods to be able to obtain the labor that they're looking for. They can absolutely use labor websites, employment websites. They can use dating websites if they're sex trafficking somebody. That's part of what happened to me.
Yeah. We're getting into that. But before that, how can we get involved in fighting this whole thing about human trafficking? How can I get involved? Well, in effect, I am getting involved now by talking to you and asking you to discuss this.
That's right.
Yeah. How can the general public get involved?
Well, that's probably first and foremost is getting educated on what human trafficking is so that we can better understand it. I didn't know that what I went through was called human trafficking for many, many, many years. And when I I found out my world exploded. It completely changed, and that can happen for others too. The best way to really get involved is to learn about the organizations that are out there already actively fighting it and get involved with some of them. Get proper education on what human trafficking looks like and how to fight it, but also learn who these organizations are and what their money is going toward. There are many wonderful organizations that are actually out there actively fighting human trafficking. There's one in Colorado Springs called Compass 31. There's one in Denver called Beautiful Feet Wellness. These are both survivor-led organizations that are actually doing the hard work of helping others to heal and to break the bonds with their traffickers. There's also organizations like Alight. They pair up survivors of human trafficking with pro bono legal services to be able to fight back and to regain a sense of dignity in their lives. But there are other organizations that will take the story of a survivor of trafficking and share the story specifically to get more sympathy and more people throwing money their way. They claim so that they can work other missions and to raise money. But if you look into these organizations, the founders of these organizations are living in multi-million-dollar mansions, and they are world-renowned, and they have movies being made about them. And if they've got all this publicity, you have to ask why, and you have to ask these stories that they're taking from survivors of trafficking and sharing. What's happening to the survivors? Are those survivors being paid for their stories? Because if they're not, that is further exploitation of the victim.
Yeah. And I do say that your story, I know you're not going to charge me for this, but your story.
Nope, I don't charge for telling my story briefly, but when I'm up on stages, I do, or if somebody wants to buy my book, that's always an option too.
Right. We talk about your book. I'm going to talk more about that, but tell me about your story though, Amanda.
So, having grown up being treated as a sex object as early as 4 years old, it happened again and again throughout my life. Throughout my teen years, I was molested multiple times by different people in completely different circumstances. And at 17, I was raped by somebody that I thought was my best friend. So after going through all of that, I started looking. I was a teenage runaway at 15. I started looking for affection from wherever I could get it from. I learned that sex was a tool that somebody was either going to take from me or I was going to give freely to be able to obtain something in return. And in my late teens, what I used it for was for food and shelter. Otherwise, I would have been homeless multiple occasions. At one point, I found myself dating and living with a man who was more than twice my age. And I was trafficked 3 different times in my life. This was the first time. The first time this man gave me to a friend of his for a weekend birthday party. And I had no idea what was going to happen. I had no idea what I was stepping into. All I knew was that I was getting an all expenses paid trip to Las Vegas. I was excited to go to Las Vegas. I was going to ride the roller coasters and go be a kid for a little while. And when we got there, I was locked up in a small hotel room for 52 hours. I wasn't able to leave. And I had to just go through with what was being done to me, multiple rapes over that 52-hour period before I could get back to where I had been living and get my stuff and leave. I wandered around the country for a little bit and moved multiple times trying to get away from that man because he kept trying to find me and kept on successfully finding me. Eventually, I made my way to Florida. My plan was to stay with my dad's mother at that point because I had injured myself really bad and I was going to need surgery on my knee. And when I got to Daytona Beach, Florida, I called my grandmother's house so that they could come and pick me up from the bus station. It was 10:30 at night. And instead of her husband, my dad's stepfather, answered the phone and said, "We're not coming to get you. Good luck and goodbye." And I learned years later that the reason that happened was because my parents had reached out to them and said, "She's running away from her problems again. If you take her in, we will never speak to you again." So I was left on the side of the road, and a young couple came and found me just crying my eyes out. And they told me that they had a place for me to stay until I could get back on my feet. But what they really meant was they had somewhere that I could stay until they found the highest bidder. And they sold me like a bag of potato chips to a guy named Esteban. I was locked up for 23 and a half hours with no food, no water, no bathroom facilities of any kind. And I was very, very blessed to be able to figure a way out of there. And the first person that I saw was a police officer.
Yeah.
When I ran to her and tried to tell her what had happened, she didn't believe me. And I couldn't make her believe me no matter what. It was too much of an unbelievable story.
Yeah.
She did see him. She saw him do an illegal U-turn when he was trying to hunt me down.
Yeah.
He saw that I was talking to her and he tried to drive away and she went after him. And I never went back to the house where I was being held. I never followed up to see if he was arrested. I never filed a police report. I just ran for my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had to deal with survivor's guilt for a very long time.
Wow.
So after Florida, I finally moved out to California, and my plan out there was I wanted to be the best assistant in the world to somebody important or somebody famous.
Okay.
And instead, I ended up on Alias and Will and Grace and several other TV shows, and I modeled for Harley Davidson. And I did some of the most amazing, creative things ever. I became a professional artist for a little while with my drawings and stuff. I had a great time, but I was still feeling lonely and empty inside.
Yeah.
And about 2004, when I was 24 years old, is when internet dating really became a big thing. So I decided I was going to try it out.
Yeah.
I'd already been through a lot, so I was going to be pretty honest with people and say, hey, I've been in abusive situations a lot and I won't put up with it.
Yeah.
And somebody that I met through internet dating lived really far away. So we knew that we weren't going to be able to do anything about the distance, but we could be pen pals. We could be friends.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And over a period of 7 years, we got to know each other very well. He lived in Scotland. I lived in California. So when he was having breakfast, I was having dinner, and we would do this over Skype so that we would actually have a meal together.
Yeah.
And we got to spend so much time together this way.
Yeah.
It was almost every single day. That was my standard dinner date, was sitting down and eating dinner as he was eating breakfast in the UK.
I love that. Yeah.
And during the 7 years, he came to visit me. I went over to go and visit him. And we finally decided that we were in love with each other. And he asked me to get a fiancé visa and move over there to be with him.
Okay.
And it took him 7 years to get me there. And it took him 7 days to start trafficking me.
Okay.
It was devastating.
Yeah.
Really quickly, I was trying desperately to find a way out.
Yeah.
I only had about $2,000 to my name, and I used that to purchase an emergency flight out, but I still had to wait a period of 5 days to be able to get the flight, because the flight for the same day or the next day was too expensive.
Yeah, I figure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to wait 5 days, and the whole time I continually got abused. During that abuse, I ended up with somebody who abused me so much that my kidneys were starting to shut down.
Oh.
And when the flight left, I was in the hospital. And it was a non-refundable flight. I'd spent everything I had except for $11 on that flight.
Yeah.
I had nothing left, and there was no way out. At one point, I tried to commit suicide. The suicide rates among victims of human trafficking is astronomically high.
Yeah.
And I mentioned something about only 2% of all victims actually survive.
Yeah.
I was almost one of those statistics. Eventually, I started to put together a plan, and I started dropping these little hints and breadcrumbs along the road as I went, just trying to guide him down the path of making him believe that I had what we used to call Stockholm Syndrome. We now call trauma bonding.
Okay.
I wanted him to believe that I had so deeply rooted trauma bonding that I would do literally anything for this man.
Yeah. Yeah.
The day that we were supposed to get married originally had come and gone. I knew we weren't going to get married. Part of the abuse that I was going through was him telling me I wouldn't ever be able to get married to somebody like you, but I'll keep you around a little longer.
Okay.
I was also starved, sleep deprivation. I was waterboarded, basically sport torture.
Yeah.
All of these things were done to me not because I had been doing something wrong, but rather because they
Definitely.
wanted to see the effects.
Yeah.
It was awful. It was really, really awful.
Wow.
There were some days that I would hallucinate and I wasn't sure if I had dropped the proper breadcrumbs or not.
Yeah.
And the whole time I'm still trying to keep this plan going and trying to be smart and try to find my way out.
Yeah.
And toward the end of this 6-month visa, I was 5 months in, and I told him one day, I said, the day that we were supposed to get married is already come and gone. And if I overstay my visa, I could get kicked out of the United Kingdom
Yeah.
and never allowed back because of their laws.
Yeah.
And with you being a police officer, you
Yeah.
could lose your job.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't want that.
Yeah.
So I tell you what we could do. If you send me back to the United States, I could live there for the next 6 months. And if you send me back fairly soon, I could come back in time for Christmas, and it would be our first Christmas together. And wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah.
Within 2 hours, he purchased a round-trip flight. One for me to get back to LA and one for me to return in time for Christmas.
Yeah.
And I ran. I ran for my life. I got back to California and I tried to hide.
Yeah.
And every single time I got a new job, every single time I had friends, he would send photos and videos of me being raped and molested.
Wow.
And he destroyed friendships. I lost jobs over this. I was continually chased and victimized and abused, even from thousands of miles away.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Eventually, in 2016, I tried to move away from California, moved out here to Colorado, and I was still trying to hide and still trying to rebuild a life and do whatever I could. And in 2019, I found out that he had taken all those same photos and videos, and I guess he couldn't find me enough to torture me anymore. So he made me famous on a pornography website. He put all of this stuff up on a pornography site, and he included social media links and personal contact information for people to be able to find me in person. And I was recognized in a grocery store.
Okay.
And it would have been neat if I was recognized for something like being on Alias or Will and Grace or Marley for Harley Davidson or any of these other really cool things that I'd done.
Yeah.
But instead, I was recognized for having been raped.
Yeah.
It destroyed me.
Yeah.
So I reached out to an anti-trafficking organization out here in Colorado.
Yeah.
They immediately paired me up with the organization that helps people to fight back and to get the pro bono legal services.
Yeah.
And they also paired me up with a therapist.
Yeah.
That was huge for me.
Yeah.
So my first therapist, I traumatized her so bad, I swear this woman left the industry and she will never be a therapist again. But the second therapist was phenomenal.
Yeah, that's that.
She was great. She helped me to get through a lot of the roadblocks and stuff that I had been experiencing. And I told her right up front, I said, first of all, do not ever come to me with a suggestion of taking pills. I've had enough pills shoved down my throat to last me a lifetime. I'm not interested in taking medication to deal with any of this stuff. I need to find real solutions, real results, not a Band-Aid. And second of all, do not walk on eggshells around me. I don't want you to pussyfoot around. I don't want you to act like I'm this delicate, fragile little flower. I need you to tell me like it is. I don't care if it's a gut punch. Be real with me.
Yeah.
And about 1.5 years into our therapy, she told me, I don't think there's much more I can do for you. You've done incredibly well. You have done so much. You're so strong. What are you going to do next? And that's when I told her I was going to write my book. And I wrote my entire autobiography in 30 days in the month of December in 2020 at the end of my therapy.
Wow. You know, and we were just talking about some of the help that you get in order to get you healed. Yeah. But did you have any other social support system besides the therapeutic sessions?
I had a little bit of a social support system. My roommate was terrible, so I didn't get anything there. I didn't have any family. I had already dismissed those people out of my life many years ago.
Right.
My support system really did come from the anti-trafficking organization. They had a small group of local survivors of trafficking that would get together once a week. And we had a sense of community, not in that we would go and talk about sob stories and try
Right.
to one up
Okay.
each other,
Yeah.
but just to sit in a room and do life skills, learn how to balance a checkbook, draw a
Okay.
picture, write a story. Just doing something together as a community
Yeah.
gave us all that sense of community that we needed. But during the lockdown, during the COVID pandemic
Right.
in 2020,
Uh-huh.
that went away. We didn't get to hang out once a week anymore. We lost that sense of community.
Yeah.
That was when I started my own podcast.
Okay. Cool.
And my
Yeah.
podcast now, this is actually my logo. My podcast now, I talk to other authors who have written about having overcome their
Oh.
own traumas.
Yeah.
And I interview them and we talk, and I do this multiple times a week. I have a new episode comes out every Friday, but this is now my sense of community, being able to talk to people
Yeah.
about having overcome adversity, not just
Right.
necessarily human trafficking, but traumas in general, and moving beyond that and finding our own structures to
Yeah.
be able to really progress in life.
That's important. Tell me quickly about your podcast in terms of how people can get to it. Because even though I'm having a podcast, we're all in this thing together. So we
Yes.
want to support each other. Talk to me a little about your podcast.
So I have two different podcasts currently. One of them is called The Survivors by Amanda Blackwood, where I interview the other authors.
Yeah.
And the other one is called Growth from Darkness. And in Growth from Darkness, my co-host from Australia, she and I get together and we discuss what the different trauma reactions are, what the long-term consequences are of not fighting back against them, and how
Right.
to fight back against them to have a better life. And we always make sure that we include personal experiences with these trauma reactions, and we do it with a sense of humor.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about something that's as deep and dark as traumas and trauma reactions, it's important that we do laugh also to
Yeah.
understand that we are still human and this is not such a depressing world. It's okay to laugh at the past and to be able to move on beyond it.
Definitely. So we can. If someone want to get to your podcast, they can just what should they do in terms of YouTube? What should they type into the system?
Basically, for the first one, The Survivors by Amanda Blackwood or Growth from Darkness. Either one should pop up on just about any podcasting platform out there. Both of them are audio only right now,
Okay.
but they're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, all different platforms.
Okay, cool. You're listening to Canyouth Exploration, your topic in a podcast, also available on Apple Podcasts. You can see this episode and remember to subscribe not only to my podcast, but also remember Amanda's podcast. Amanda, you talk about the trauma and all of that, but I'm not sure what your relationships, not necessarily intimate, but otherwise, what your relationships are like now, having gone through all of that. Can anyone, you, the other person who are trafficked, and so on, have a sort of a fulfilling, effective relationship after all of that?
Absolutely. And this was one of my biggest questions in 2018 when I was still trying to figure out how to deal with all of this. I was not in a place to be able to have any kind of a functional relationship. But once I was able to do the hard work and to go through the therapy and learn how to fight back and write my story out and get all of this stuff out of my brain, off of my heart, and out into the world away from me, it was no longer a part of who I was. It was a part of who I had been. Once my book was published, it came out in June of 2021 on my 10-year anniversary of freedom. The next month was when I met the man that's now my husband. And he is the most supportive, amazing, kind, loving, gentle, patient man I've ever met in my life.
Yes.
I have very, very close friendships, but they are very limited. I do not need 50 friends.
That's all right.
I need 2 friends, and I need them to be quality. And that's the beauty of having healthy boundaries.
I understand that. And I must applaud your husband now, right? I to him, all the best, sir. I must ask you this question, because whatever our adversities are in life, as I said to you, I've had my adversities as well. Um, we want to share because we want to help others, right? And I'm
Yeah.
sure you are helping others through your book, but also there might be something you'd like to say to someone, that one thing, right, that you could tell someone who is going through, what you went through.
Probably the biggest one is we've all grown up hearing that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
That could not be more wrong.
Okay.
Friedrich Nietzsche is the man who first said that in the 1800s, and that man died in an insane asylum. We can let go of what he said.
Right.
It is not your abusers and it is not your experiences that made you stronger. You were already strong enough to get through all of it. You just got to dig deep within yourself to be able to find that strength. It's there and it exists, and you can rely on this to get you out and get you through. And just know that no matter how daunting and scary it is to do that hard work to be able to move through this trauma and to face it and to fight it, you are strong enough to do that too. If you're strong enough to have survived everything that you've come through, you've got this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's important, because besides human trafficking and the trauma that you have gone through, many persons watching, listening to Canyouth Exploration is going through, have gone through, but still not healed. And your message to them now, just now, it's really critical. Looking at your book, Growth from Darkness, right? It's let's talk about that some more. I saw that on your website, and I will have the website in the description so that people can go to it and order the book, right? My personal story is being told through my book, Soaring Through Turmoil, on Amazon as well. But what's Growth from Darkness?
When we're traumatized, we are in a very dark place. People who live in a perpetual place of trauma believe that there is no way that they're ever going to climb out of this deep, dark hole that somebody else has dug. We are stuck there, and we need to find a way to climb out. But if somebody doesn't lower down the ladder, we have to learn to grow so that we can get from this dark place up back into the light and to claw our way back out. Growth from Darkness is the name of my website. It's the name of my podcast. It's the name of the workbook series. It's all of these things. Now, the workbook series, the first book, talks about the stages of trauma. The stages of trauma are very similar to the stages of grief, because when we go through a trauma, it changes who we are. And we have to grieve for the person that we've lost, for the person that we now will never be. We have been changed by outside circumstances, and it's okay to go through the depression and the anger and the bargaining and the denial. And it's okay to move into that place of acceptance and then learn how to accept ourselves, not just the trauma. The second book I'm still working on. It will be released later this year. It's about the trauma reactions, the long-term consequences of not fighting back, and how to fight back against them with healthier mechanisms to be able to help retrain our brains. The third book is going to be about healthy boundaries, how to build them. And the fourth book is something that I haven't seen anywhere yet, and it's about how to support survivors. A lot of people who have survived trauma don't know how to communicate with their partners, with their loved ones, with their families on what they need from them. So I'm hoping that this book might be able to help the survivors' family members and loved ones to understand that what they're going through has nothing to do with them, and sometimes their reactions are going to be very hurtful, and it's they're trying to figure out how to deal with what it is they're going through, and they're going to need help.
Yeah, you have said something important there, Amanda, because sometimes persons who have gone through situations will react in a particular way, and the persons who are quote unquote victims to their reactions will think that, hey, it's about them. Right. Many times it's not about them, it's about the challenges that persons have been going through, and they're still having that baggage, that luggage, in other words. And my question to you before we end this, those luggage, those baggage, how do people shed them? Persons who have gone through trauma, be it human trafficking or other traumatic experiences? How do they, get rid of these luggage, these baggage?
I love that you word it like that. This painting back here behind me was one of mine. I painted this in 2021, and this is hanging in a home for human trafficking survivors in Chicago, Illinois. This painting is called Carry Your Own Baggage. And with the painting there in their home is the essay that talks about how we all have to carry our own baggage through life until we find a safe place to set it down. And that's the key, is we have to find that safe place. And that safe place can be inside us. The safe place can be on the canvas. It can be in the pages of a book. It can be with a friend or a therapist. We have to find a safe place to set it down, because nobody else really cares as much as we do about the contents.
Yeah. I love that. You see, we do not pay for that luggage, right? And
Right. Nobody cares about what all is in that suitcase more than I do.
I
They're
know.
not going to be digging through it and asking me about the summer dress that I haven't worn since I was 8.
Hey, Amanda Blackwood, I love it. I love what you have given us, as it relates to your experience, how we can deal with our trauma. I know I'm in psychology. I understand a lot of what you have said, but again, for my audience, right, it's important that they understand as well, and use some of the guidelines that you have given, be it subtle and to those who are being trafficked now, and you get a peep on this, and hey, remember what Amanda had said, and you have your story to tell when you get rid of all of that, because you will get rid of it, and you will come out shining as well, and have your story as well to empower someone. Thanks for empowering someone, Amanda. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. White. This has been a really, really great experience for me. I really appreciate you, and I love what you're doing.
Thank you. Bye-bye. That was Amanda, and she have said a lot, and it's interesting some of the things that she have said, not only for persons who were being trafficked, are being trafficked and were trafficked, but those persons going through traumatic experiences now, those persons who have gone through and still carrying that luggage, that baggage. Amanda has used her experience to empower, to enlighten someone. Remember our podcast, go there, subscribe, and as well as subscribing to my podcast, take some of what she has to say and share with a friend as well, our friends, so that they too can be empowered, can be inspired, because we're all in this thing for each other. Thank you for watching, listening. Canyouth Exploration, your topic in the podcast. We'll talk again. Goodbye.